welcome to Hashimoto's Unfiltered, real talk, real solutions. The podcast where we cut through the noise and get straight to the heart of living with Hashimoto's. My name is Dr. Ray Benedetto, your host, and I'm here to share my expertise, personal insights, and from time to time, conversations with incredible guests to help you take control of your health. Together, we'll explore actionable items, debunk myths, and navigate the complexities of your thyroid health. So whether you're newly diagnosed or a seasoned warrior, this is your space for unfiltered truth and real hope. Let's dive in. We are talking what I like to call root cause clarity. This can be a very daunting endeavor for a lot of people because it's like, I don't even know where to start. Like, there's a lot to do. And so people start with like, well, I cut out gluten. All right, great start. I cut out gluten and dairy. Great start. Like, there's just so much more to it than that. When we talk about root causes, we're talking about how do we figure out for someone, and each person's going to be different. So I'm going to be broad today and be like, look, here's the categories of stuff that we need to look at. And then here's the umbrella of this category and this and this and this. I'm going to break it all down for you. I'm actually in the process right now of putting together like a visual, like a handout, like a checklist, something that you can use, something that I can use with my patients, but something that you could use too, to be like, hey, can I see that checklist, Dr. B? And it's just like, here's this category. And like, here's the things I need to look for. How do I test for them? How do I know it might be a problem? Like, what kind of symptoms might I get from this? That kind of thing. I'm putting that together, so stay tuned. But basically, it's a lot. There's a lot going on. There's everyone's going to be different. Number one. Number two, there are a lot of different root causes that we could look for. We're not going to, do every test under the sun and look for all of them for everyone. It's not necessary and it's not really plausible. This is what I do with my patients: is do a case workup and be like, all right, which ones do we need to look for you? We don't need to look at all of them. Which ones do we need to look at with you that make the most sense based on your case and your symptoms and your blood work or whatever? So we're going to talk today kind of broadly about, like, here are the different categories. Here are the more common root causes underneath that category umbrella. And then how do you look for them? What do you do about them when you find them? All that kind of stuff. So I hope this one will be pretty valuable about that today, because I get a lot of questions on this. So it's kind of the point in the process. If you guys have been obviously listening to me or following me at any point, you see I have a system, like I have a process that we take people through. It's really kind of a 3-step process. It's like step number 1, accurate diagnosis. We touched on that kind of a little bit a couple weeks ago. I just did a workshop last week on it. Like, step 1 is proper diagnosis, proper Hashimoto's diagnosis. Once we can, like, I have someone I'm meeting with right after this, like, hadn't been diagnosed. I sent her for the labs. She's got Hashimoto. So we have to have that conversation. Like, okay, now we've identified the diagnosis. Here are the next steps on getting this thing handled. Step 1 is proper diagnosis of the Hashimoto's, and then also getting proper blood work done on the front end to do that. And then also to start looking at, if we do have Hashimoto's, then to start looking at underlying triggers that we can see on blood work, or root causes that we can see on blood work. Once we can establish that, step 2 is, okay, for this person, what other root causes do we need to look at? You guys have heard me talk ad nauseum. I love 2 tests for most people: a Dutch test and genetic health profile. That's going to look at stuff that maybe we can't see on regular blood work or is not super reliable. And again, that's where it gets individualized for everybody, because it's like, we may do these 2 tests, but then we may also do some other tests based on this particular person. So that's step 2, is figuring out, we've identified the Hashimoto's. Now we got to figure out what's causing the Hashimoto's. That's the root cause stuff that we're going to talk about today. And then the third step is, AIP protocol, diet work, that kind of stuff, nutritional work, all those kinds of things. Healing, starting to get on the healing path to get someone's body healed from the Hashimoto's and get it into remission. So those are kind of like the 3 steps. So we're going to work on step 2 today, which is root cause clarity. So let's kind of dig right in, okay? Now, let's start with the big number 1, is that the root cause category. Let's call these root cause categories, okay? Number 1 would be food and or dietary triggers. So obviously we look at the big stuff. People look at gluten and dairy, but we also need to think about, and soy and eggs and nuts and seeds. And yeah, we need to figure out someone's food stuff. And there's a couple different ways we can do that. But we also need to think about, and again, this is stuff we can check on blood work. That's why we do that in step 1. We need to think about things like blood sugar imbalances or nutrient deficiencies that we can see on blood work, like vitamin D or ferritin or what have you. And we also need to talk about things like industrial oils, processed foods, that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, can you test for food stuff? Of course you can. Do I test for food stuff with my patients as a matter of routine? No, I do not as a matter of routine. I have in the past on many occasions. I used to do it fairly routinely, actually. I don't now, but you can. I don't do it with my patients because I have found it not to be worth the money, to be honest with you, in the beginning on spending money on a test when we can figure out other ways. Which, as most of you know, the way I like to figure out the food stuff is eliminate it all, eliminate anything that could be a problem for a period of time. So that way we can kind of go in and start healing stuff and calm stuff down and all those kinds of things. And then reintroduce systematically. That is the best way to do it. Can you do testing? Yes. If you're going to do testing, you want to do IgA or IgG. IgG and IgA together, preferably, if you're going to test. Now, here's the thing. When we talk about foods, people, the medical world, forget it, but even, regular everyday people like yourselves think like, well, I don't have a lot of digestive issues. So it's probably not foods. And unfortunately, it's a misnomer. Yes, digestive issues are common, but I see a ton of symptoms like brain fog, joint pain, fatigue, skin issues, energy crashes, weight gain, especially around the midsection, like irritability, mood swings, all of these things, which are readily associated with Hashimoto's as well, could be due symptomatically even to a food sensitivity. I've just seen it, not a million times, I've seen it thousands of times with patients over the years where like we take these foods out and those symptoms go away. Are they partially due to the Hashimoto's? Yes. Are they also potentially, possibly due to the reaction someone's having from that food by itself? Yes. So foods is a huge one. It's not the only one. As you're going to see, we have a lot more to go. But yes, you can test some of the stuff you can see on blood work, like blood sugar imbalances and that kind of stuff. But when we talk about specific foods, yes, you could test. That's one option. My favorite option is to, just because I've seen it work the best and the most efficiently and the quickest and the easiest over the years, eliminate, strict elimination, then reintroduce. So foods is category number one. Category number 2, if you're taking notes out there and you got questions, just let me know. Let me know. Post it in the comments and I will get to it. Root cause category number 2, umbrella number 2, gut health and gut infections. There's a couple of big ones. Increased intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut. Dysbiosis, imbalances in the biome, in the makeup of your digestive tract, the bacteria. That could be both good bacteria and bad bacteria. So things like SIBO, H. pylori, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Dysbiosis, right? Which means imbalance in the biome. Infections, chronic infections, viruses primarily, when we talk about that kind of stuff. And candida and or fungal overgrowth. These are the big ones that we look for under the umbrella, the root cause category of gut health and infectious stuff. What's going to be some symptoms of these things? Obviously, food sensitivities, unexplained food sensitivities, chronic digestive problems, yes, but also things like chronic bad breath. When we talk about like H. pylori or SIBO, chronic bad breath, persistent bloating after meals, acid reflux, heartburn, chronic viruses, right? We have a history of viral infections and we get recurrent symptoms. Candida and fungal overgrowth, like chronic cravings, sugar cravings, recurrent fungal infections, like thrush, reoccurring urinary tract infections, that kind of stuff. Again, what are going to be some of the symptoms that we see? It's going to sound very common. Chronic fatigue, unexplained skin stuff, joint pain, persistent fatigue, poor immune responses, digestive stuff. It sounds familiar. We see these things with Hashimoto's, but we also can see these things individually with these root causes going on. So they need to be figured out. Can you test for this stuff? Yes. H. pylori, there's a breath test. We can do stool testing. There's a SIBO test, breath test. Can you test for leaky gut? Yeah, of course you can. I don't as a matter of routine. Again, I've done all this stuff, but you can test to see if someone has leaky gut. Everyone had it. I tested people and everyone had it. So now someone comes to me, I'm like, listen, you got it. So we're going to treat it as if, because it's there. So yeah, you can test for all this stuff. You could run $1 bazillion in testing if you wanted to. I've just found it not to be necessary, but that's just from experience. You might get to some kind of lesser experienced docs and they're just going to be like, I don't know how to figure this out. So we got to run all these tests and, you're $2,000 and, spend into tests before we even do any treatment. And I've just found it not to be necessary, but that's through experience, really, to be honest with you. Chronic infectious stuff. So if we suspect chronic viral stuff, then you run the blood test, you run the antibody titers. Epstein-Barr virus, a common one. Herpes viruses, very common. Lyme disease, you can check for these things. And then if we're, again, suspect candida or fungal overgrowth, there's some comprehensive stool testing that can be done. So that's umbrella number 2, gut health and infectious stuff. These are all underlying root causes for Hashimoto's. And again, heck, they can cause symptoms all on their own. Either way, they need to be dealt with. They need to be looked at. Again, someone might come to me and I don't suspect any of this stuff. I'm not really checking for it then. Or I used to check for it. I found everybody had it, like leaky gut. So we're just going to build it into treatment protocols that hey, you got this. Even the infectious stuff. Anyone who's here has been through my protocols, they'll tell you I just assume something's going on in there for everyone. So we don't test. I don't test right away. I build it into my protocols. We take care of the diet part by taking foods out, and then we supplement. I do some supplements that are going to help heal up this stuff in the gut, for example, if it's there, because it's almost always there. And then if after we do that, we get weeks and months down the road, 9 times out of 10, it's gone. It's all better because something was there. We just fixed it. We assumed it was there and we fixed it as if, or not, then we can test. Then we can really drill down on that specific issue. That's really my philosophy, and it has worked quite well over the years, even to this day. Number 3, root cause category number 3. It's hormones and stress. Well, I kind of lump these together because they really play a role together, especially when it comes to number 1, adrenal dysfunction. Always see this. You're going to, everybody's probably listening to the sound of my voice right now. History of chronic stress, anxiety, reliance on things like caffeine to get through the day, stimulants. How do people describe feeling wired but tired? They have insomnia or poor sleep or have midday crashes. Again, most of I said it earlier, this is why I do Dutch tests on almost everybody, because we always find this stuff. These are things that we do always find that I do want to test, because depending on what's going on, depending on what pattern of adrenal dysfunction we're seeing, and we see the same thing with hormones, like hormone imbalances, depends on what we're seeing as far as the pattern of it all is going to dictate the treatment of it to get it balanced and to get it fixed. So these are things that we do always see that I do always recommend testing because we have to figure that out. So I love the Dutch complete test, adrenal dysfunction. Other kinds of hormones too, sex hormones, right? Sex hormone imbalances. Can't tell you how many conversations I have on the daily about people talking about hormone replacement therapy and this and that. And I don't know if I should do it. My doctor wants to do it. And, that kind of stuff. And it's very common. Things like estrogen dominance. What do we see in patients that have this stuff? Irregular, heavy periods, menstrual periods, mood swings, difficult with weight loss, hair loss, weight gain, increased symptoms premenstrually. So again, Dutch test. We have to figure this stuff out. We spoke also things like progesterone, testosterone imbalances, low progesterone or low testosterone. I find this a lot, low androgens. So what are some of those symptoms? Low libido, sleep problems, mood, chronic fatigue, weakness. How do we check this stuff? Dutch. We can cross off almost this entire category of root cause with a Dutch test, which is why I love the Dutch test. With the hormone component, the stress component, the nutrient component. There's an organic acid part of the Dutch test, which looks at like nutrient deficiencies, neurotransmitter imbalances, oxidative stress markers like cellular inflammatory stuff. We can see all that stuff on a Dutch, which is why like a Dutch test checks off a couple of these root cause categories, which is why I love it. Like with one test, we can get like 50% of your stuff. You know, you got to look at things like insulin resistance too. Insulin's a hormone, so we got to look at things like insulin resistance too, which again we can see symptomatically with someone who may have fatigue after meals or difficulty losing weight, especially around the midsection. But again, we can check these things on blood work, insulin resistance. Number four root cause category. Okay, I have listed here six big ones that I like to check. Nutritional deficiencies, huge, absolutely huge. Now, again, some of these easily seen on blood work. Sometimes we need advanced testing for this, but some of these easily seen on blood work. What are the big ones? We talked about some on the workshop. I talked about it a couple weeks ago. Iron, ferritin, very common. We see things like hair loss, fatigue, restless legs, all that kind of stuff. Irregular menstrual cycles, easily checked on blood work. Vitamin D as in dog, huge. These are things we see across the board. Low mood, depression, generalized body aches, poor immune function. Sounds familiar. Check it on a blood work. Magnesium deficiencies, constipation, anxiety, insomnia, fatigue. It's like a broken record, gang. Any one of these things can cause symptoms or be a root cause of the Hashimoto. So we have to figure these things out. Again, blood test. Some of these I'll do advanced blood testing. Like you guys have heard me talk about Vibrant Wellness. I love their stuff. We look at like not serum blood, but we look at like red blood cells. Like we can test the concentration of these actually inside the red blood cells. That takes a specialized test. It's not like a regular blood test where they're just looking at the serum, the blood. And selenium deficiency, crucial micronutrient for thyroid function. And again, we might see people with difficulty converting T4 to T3. Again, muscle weakness, all this kind of stuff with selenium. We can check it again, blood, hair. You can do hair tissue and a mineral analysis is one of my go-tos for a lot of these nutrients. If we're looking for a whole bunch of them with someone, like outside of these big ones, if we're worried about a bunch of stuff and we can't get it on blood or the Dutch test, we may do an individualized test. The hair mineral analysis is a really good one for that. So nutritional deficiencies, huge. Number 5, genetic susceptibilities. Genetics. Again, I do DNA, genetic health profiles on pretty much all my patients. Nobody does it. And we find some huge issues on there that, again, we can't change because it's your DNA. We can change the expression of it. We can turn the volume down on it. We can deal with it. You guys know the big ones. MTHFR mutations, right? Someone's going to have difficulty detoxifying. They're going to see fatigue because they're not methylating properly. They're going to have increased anxiety. Again, I do a DNA genetic test health profile where I can look at all of these genetics. MTHFR is kind of in a bigger picture of methylation. Again, these are going to be significant roadblocks that we can't overcome on someone. So they might get better, but they might get all the way better because these genetic roadblocks could be there. And if we don't do testing and look at them, we can't identify them and we can't deal with them. There's HLA genes. Those are known risk factors for developing autoimmune conditions. They also play a large role in like gluten sensitivity and stuff like that. So what they're known as HLA genes. We see things like histamine intolerance, DAO mutations. That's going to be with all this weird skin stuff, nasal congestion, headaches, that kind of stuff. We'll see digestive issues, all that kind of stuff. Again, we can see all of this on a DNA, genetic health profile. I see a ton of glutathione and SOD markers. So these are antioxidants. I see this on a ton of people. So they have genetic mutations where they can't make these antioxidants very well. So they're susceptible to cellular damage and cellular inflammatory stuff. So genetics, huge. And then the last one, number 6, is environmental toxins exposure. So environmental stuff, the big stuff, right? We see a lot. Heavy metals, chemicals, right? Somebody has a history of working with these things, or they're in their environment, their home. Very common to see a lot of neurological stuff with these because that's where they kind of get deposited a lot of times. So we'll see neurological issues, brain fog, chronic fatigue, that kind of stuff. Mold and mycotoxins, huge. I got someone coming in tonight. They just found it in their house, coming into my office because we got to talk testing now. So huge. Again, what are we going to see? Fatigue, chronic pain, cognitive stuff, right? Brain fog. Broken record, gang. Broken record. And then like a lot of environmental stuff that we get exposed to, right? Fluoride, chlorine, stuff like this. In tap water, dental procedures, pools, right? Can interfere with how our body uses iodine and thyroid enzyme function, stuff like that. Most of these can be tested with hair or urine. That's kind of the easiest way to check on those things. But as you can see, gang, any one of these categories, which I'll do a quick recap, can A, cause the symptoms, and B, can be checked for. And again, this is going to vary individually for each person. This is why I don't do cookie cutter stuff with my patients. So I don't have cookie cutter programs and protocols that I put people in. Not saying those don't help, but everyone's going to be different. Every case needs to be evaluated on its own to be able to determine what's the proper path moving forward. Here are your root cause category recap. Food and dietary stuff. So these are the broad spectrum stuff that I run all my patients through, basically. Food and dietary stuff, gut health and infectious stuff, hormones and stress, nutritional deficiencies, genetics, and environmental stuff, environmental exposure, environmental toxins. There's your summary. That'll serve you well if you took some notes. If not, you can go back and listen to the replay. But that'll serve you well when thinking about your own Hashimoto's, like where might I need to look and how might I need to look there. If you need my help, let me know. I'll help you with it. I want to thank you for tuning in to Hashimoto's Unfiltered, Real Talk, Real Solutions. Again, my name is Dr. Ray Benedetto, and I hope today's episode helped to give you the tools and the insights you need to take another step forward on your Hashimoto's journey. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode if you think someone could benefit. You can also connect with me on Facebook at Dr. Ray Benedetto and on my website, drraybenedetto.com, for more resources and updates. Until next time, remember, you're not alone, and real solutions are always within reach. Take care and be well.